All right, so this is a minor thing, or I should say it's a minor symptom of kind of a major problem. Last night, Toonami's got one of the buffers where Tom is supposed to give an uplifting, "Yeah, kid, you can do it" speech. I always thought those were corny, but they never really bothered me. It was kind of fun. They usually put like a montage of all the different uh, shows they're having and like what the themes are that tie them all together. That's pretty cool, right? But he starts off with, uh, I guess, framing it like as a fallacy. I'm not sure how to even really describe um, how he starts this. He basically says, um, "I don't see color. Racism isn't real anymore, and all lives matter." He puts them all in the same category, and he says they're hurtful. Okay, hurtful to who? Um, those three different statements are uh, completely different and not necessarily mutually exclusive. I don't understand. Like the anime community's never had a problem with racism, so like I don't know who he's lecturing to, other than just indoctrinating, you know, young minds, young adults, or I guess really young kids, because they do get a lot of viewers who are definitely under the age that the shows are recommended for. And he ends it with, Black Lives Matter, you can fight injustice. And now, it's not that I have a problem with, maybe the themes of the shows all being tied together and basically something is said about, hatred and discrimination and maybe even, racism of some sort. If you can tie that together, okay. The stories are being told, and I don't know any anime that tells, at least that Toonami runs, that tells you like to hate people, right? It's all usually about overcoming hate. But that's not really what happened. They went out of their way to basically talk down to a good portion of their audience, and say stuff that's just completely oblivious to like what's going on. Like, for example, like when someone says they don't see color, it basically they're just stating that they will judge somebody for their character, and it's not that they literally can't see what race somebody is, but it's basically like they actively reject any preconceived notions they have with that they're going to have just because of somebody's race. Now that's generally a good thing. Um, I get that sometimes that can maybe lead to some people being culturally insensitive in some way because oh, you treat them the same, and now they're upset. Okay, I kind of get that, but that's really not. That's not a. It's not hurtful. It just might. It triggers some people unfairly, and some other people maybe they feel like, no, you have to understand the racial context to whatever this event they're talking about is. But in general, that's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing for kids to say, like, yeah, I don't consider race when I consider who I'm going to be friends with or whether I like somebody or not. That's fine. The second thing was, what was it? Racism isn't really a thing anymore. Now, what they mean by that, when people say that, is like basically like the mass, Jim Crow and all this other stuff. Like that's not really a thing anymore. One of the worst things you can call somebody is a racist, and you can or accuse them of racism, and that ends their entire like career and life and stuff. And that means the whole era where like racism was like an acceptable thing to be doesn't really exist. I understand it's not well worded, but then he goes on, and actually I'm going to jump ahead before I even get to the All Lives Matter stuff. He jumps ahead and he says, you have to work to end racism. And it's not, you can't end other people's racism. You can only self-reflect and do your best as an individual. Racism is part of the human condition. It's part of just as violence, just as as lust, as greed, as all these different things. Like, it's part of being human is have to fight against these demons, and particularly the rejection of the other. Sometimes the caution and rejection of the other is actually good because it keeps your, it keeps you safe. And other times when it's something that basically crosses into racism, it's not good, and it's something that is now a problem. It's part of the human condition. It's not something where it's like you can just fight and make racism go away. That's just not how it works. That's incredibly immature to make that kind of statement, and it's frustrating to see that like pushed on Toonami. So, which I know a lot of kids are watching, and they're going to think like racism is something you can go out onto the street and punch in the face. That's kind of that's not how racism works, and the people writing that and Steve Bloom, really, you should know better. That's not at all. That doesn't provide a solution to racism by saying go out there and fight racism and fight injustice. That's not a fair comparison, particularly when you're calling out somebody who's saying racism isn't really a thing anymore. Well, in a lot of ways it's not. So you can have that discussion, but that's at least that's not something to just like come out and dunk on people for. And then the last thing was all lives matter, which he put in the category. Well, the reason all lives matter was a thing was because basically when BLM, and we're talking back in 2015 during the Ferguson riots. That's when that's when like BLM really came to prominence. And it was because the people marching were saying, kill the pigs, all cops are bastards, blah, 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 And they were also ignoring cases of, basically the fact that police shootings of minorities and stuff were actually falling, but lots of, white people also suffered. Like it shouldn't matter if it's an issue like police abuse, or abuse of force, or just people getting killed in general. It shouldn't matter what color they are. It doesn't make them special. Now, I understand this is a specific problem, and we want to talk about that. It's like, you're fighting breast cancer, and then someone getting mad saying, all the cancer's mad. I understand that argument, but that's not why all lives matter has become a thing. It's a reaction to BLM as an organization pretty much ignoring everything and just basically sainting anyone who's got a dark enough skin tone and calling everyone else racist. The fact he ends it with Tom ends his little speech with Black Lives Matter. That's an organization. That's an organization that stands for some really, really nasty things. Destruction of the nuclear family. It's basically Marxism. And he's going to tell people, don't say all lives matter and say Black Lives Matter. And if you don't, you're perpetuating. You're not fighting injustice or fighting racism. And that's not fair to say to people, and it's really inappropriate for somebody who's just a host to basically lead you on to the entertainment that you're watching in the evening to then accuse you of. And it's kind of indoctrination. It ignores how complex the issue is. All they needed to say is talk about I guess it's like, all right, Toonami, you've got a 30-second spot or whatever they're doing. It's probably not a good idea to have Tom give like a mini lecture on race, because he's just going to either completely gloss over things that are extremely important distinctions, or he's going to throw the camps. In other words, which is what it really was the not only do you have to not be a racist, you have to be actively out there fighting racism, which what the hell does that mean, right? It's disappointing. It's not surprising, but why? This is becoming a major problem within the entertainment community, particularly the anime community. I think they don't listen to their audience, and they're kind of in a bubble. Not everybody, but enough of them. Like you should be able to tell that that's not something that's inappropriate, or I should say, it's not appropriate to address that subject in that manner, in that format. because that's basically you're just being an absolutist. Um, you should know that. You don't want to be like, well, these things are offensive to Christians or something, and then remember Jesus is your savior at the end. Like it's kind of the same sort of dogmatic. Oh, you want to be with the cool kids, and I don't want young people or even people who are watching, or like police officers and stuff, like, to now be like, oh, if you're not actively, if you have any objections to the BLM organization, then guess what? That means you're not actively fighting racism and you're part of the problem. Completely ignoring just the complexity of the situation and it was the same night, some guy was murdered in Portland just for wearing a Patriot Prayer hat. I think he had like a Blue Lives flag on a patch on him. I saw in one picture, but that guy was just straight up murdered. And is that murder any more or less horrific if it was racially motivated? Or who's out there fighting racism? Is it the people rioting? Because that's what we're seeing. Like that's the hot issue right now. I mean, if anything, he was going to say something, be like, hey, keep your cool, and violence is the last resort or something. Like that would have been maybe a more appropriate general message, But instead, it was basically endorsing the idea of you must actively fight racism, which doesn't mean, I should say, that means a certain thing to BLM, the organization, and it means a different thing to people who are more moderate, and they just kind of move the goalpost with depending on who they're talking to. Because if you criticize them and say, hey, you guys are basically giving a license for people to be violent assholes, and they'll say, no, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about peaceful protests. But then when you say, okay, these people burned a building down, it's like, yeah, but their anger was righteous, and how else are they going to fight racism? It's the goalposts keep moving back and forth, and it's really not something that Tom from Toonami should be bringing up and talking about, because we're all watching Toonami to have a little bit of escapism, and he's going to guilt you for not having the correct stance on racism. It's unsettling. I hope somebody at Cartoon Network gets a better head about it. I don't think people are going to like the fact that he's saying essentially political slogans for Marxist groups, which Black Lives Matter is. It's like the People's Workers Party or something, or it's like you can just call it whatever you want. You can say, oh, you're anti-fascist, but also the group Antifa is not anti-fascist. They're just communist thugs with really fascistic tendencies. So it's really dumb for them to dive into the politics and the sloganeering. That would be like adopting a campaign slogan from one of the parties. Like if he came out and he said, "Make America Great Again," well, that's not a political thing. We just love America, and we want you to make it great. Everybody should like that. Now, Donald Trump can kind of say that. People who are saying it on behalf of Trump can say, "Hey, this is what we mean by it." But like, should Tom come out and be like, "Well, and you have to actively go out there and make America great"? Because if you're not actively doing that, then clearly you're for not making America great. It's a false choice, and really, Toonami of all places has no business jumping into that. The viewers are there to be entertained. Tom, Steve Bloom, you guys aren't moral arbiters. You're not particularly political savvy, and what you have to say is not particularly interesting. In terms of, you pretty much just toe the regular DNC line, the framing of it. You can say this on your own time. I mean, I know you might be a dick to people on Twitter and whatnot. I mean, you can hold your own opinions, but to use now Tom and Toonami to essentially spread political propaganda and to tell young viewers that they're not good people if they're not on board with this particular political messaging. That's wrong. That's really wrong. So I went on a little too long, but it's more disappointing than anything else. So I guess we just have to. I mean, I guess it's what we kind of expect at this point, because they're in LA and they're in a bubble, and they just think that like they've got this awesome righteous wisdom that really they don't have. They don't understand their audience. They don't understand the right. They don't understand why people are like really mad at BLM right now, because the organization is basically Marxist, and they're not really doing anything to help black people. They're just burning down businesses. I mean, it's BLM is bundled by was it Act Blue, which is a financial arm of the DNC. They're the ones who give Biden his money and all. It's like you can't just and it's like I said before, it would be the same as Tom saying "Make America Great Again" or something. It doesn't. It's not. It's a political sloganeering where it's not appropriate. And it doesn't matter whether you think, oh, it's anti-racism, because then I could say, oh, well, then "Make America Great Again." That's just I'm just want the best for America. Like would that be acceptable for Tom to come out and say that? No, not really. Toonami is not the place for political commentary. Leave that to the pundits on the internet and personal videos and stuff like that. Like, it's not that we can't have the discussion. It's just that is not a fair forum to frame your argument and really basically make a bunch of your viewers feel bad for just disagreeing with you politically. I think that's certainly not what a lot of these shows originating in Japan were meant to do. It's not appropriate, and it's just. Sorry, I'm watching my neighbor's dog wandered over here. Now he's in a garden. Not a big deal. He's a nice dog. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's like, do you boycott Toonami? Probably not. I mean, we want to see the shows, right? But will there be backlash? See, my fear always when I see something like this is that some pundit on some like right-wing Christian conservative site, like somebody like a what's his name, Matt Walsh from Daily Wire. I like Matt. I think he's really wrong on a lot of stuff, but I generally like him. He's written some really good, thoughtful articles. I don't think he's a bad guy. But I think when it would come to something like this, like if this were to be brought to his attention, he would immediately focus on, he would say, oh my God, the Marxism indoctrinate, like it would be really cringy, whatever the response was. And not just the fact that, like it's sloganeering, that's what makes it cringy, not just that it's commie BS. So, whatever. I mean, I await the next one. They get away with this, they're going to start talking about income inequality, and they're going to talk about, social entitlement and just weird stuff. It's subversion. They just slip this in a little bit, and they don't know they're doing it. They think they're doing a good service. They're thinking, yeah, this will make people less racist. But it's not. It's just making things worse. So, whatever. Keep that crap out of our entertainment, please.